Welcome, friends, to the Process Podcast. I am your host today, Chris, and today we have an online episode with one Brannen Dorman. Now, if you are in the CrossFit space for any time at all, you know this guy. He's one of the best CrossFit coaches out there. He works with a lot of athletes in the one-on-one space as well as in remote group programming. He is recently launched Redemption Athlete, which is a CrossFit training program specifically made for masters athletes. Now, why is this important? What makes a masters athlete different from your typical CrossFit athlete? And what does Brannen have up his sleeve for this CrossFit journey for his masters athletes and everyone else? Find out right now. Welcome to the Process Podcast. I'm Chris and you're Brannen. And today we're talking about you. We're talking about your coaching history. We're talking about Redemption Athlete, which you just started up informally. How long has this been going on, this company?
Yeah, it's been about it's the 6 weeks, maybe a little less, 5.5 weeks.
Okay, cool. And the timing could not be better because I'm sure you have athletes that are about to embark in the CrossFit Open, which as of this recording is going to happen in less than 2 weeks. Something about like 10 days or so would be kicking off the new season.
Close.
Right. So, I sent you a list of questions and we can kind of like dive in. We've kind of talked about some of the things already, which is great. But just for the people who don't know you, I guess, first of all, just reiterate your name. And I guess what I'd love to hear about how people introduce themselves is like, how would you describe yourselves in 3 things in the sense of like, what roles are for you from least to most important? So just kind of let's dive into that and let's hear about it.
Okay. I'm Brannen Dorman, and I got into the coaching world, like CrossFit world, like over 12 years ago. So, just kind of give like some quick background. I actually was in strength and conditioning first at a small private school in South Florida. And then through that, I met someone that was in the CrossFit space and we started a gym. And then that went from a small gym to a bigger gym and built some connections there, ended up working at Training Think Tank. Worked there for over 10 years. And then in December of 2024, so just 2 months ago, we separated. And from that, obviously, I started my own brand. And it's been an amazing experience. I was able to learn a ton. And so that was like again, the whole process has been very formative. You cut out on the 3 things. So do you want to ask what exactly I'm answering? And then
no worries. Yeah. So like exactly, what are you first and foremost in 3 things, right? So like if I were to answer that question, I think first and foremost, and maybe this will be an easy one for you too, is like I'm a dad. And that's like that's the thing that at the end of the day I need to make sure I'm doing. Like if I'm gone for a while and I cross the border into Hong Kong, because it's like an hour and a half to get to Coastal Fitness is where we are based in Hong Kong. And if I have the opportunity to come back home, even if we're doing like a 2-3 day seminar, I will go home because my kids are at an age where they ask if I'm coming back. And I know, because I was a teenager too, right? Like there's going to be a day where I don't mind if I don't see my parents, or there's going to be some days where I didn't realize I didn't see my parents. And right now, if they're saying, when are you going to come back? I'm like, I am on my way. So that's my first and foremost is I'm a dad, and everything else kind of figures out from there. So that would be my So for you, where are you at?
Got it. Yeah. Okay, cool. That's funny you say that, just because like I remember being a teenager too, and it scares me to death when my kids are teenagers.
Yeah.
And
that's okay.
I don't want
That's
them to
okay.
make
I'm
the
not
same
going to hold it
mistakes.
against them. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I'm a Christ follower. I'm a husband would be second, and then I'm a father third. Family is everything to me, and that's obviously why that's one of the reasons why I stayed in the fitness world, is because the flexibility to be home. Like I'm, obviously it's late at night where I am right now, but still, like I can work at home. I can be to your point, like I can drive back if I need to. If I need to go somewhere, I can go work and then come back and make sure that the priority is still my family.
Awesome. And, when I think about your company, right, you could have chosen any name and you went with Redemption Athlete. And the motto is, as your website says, rewrite your story. So, I mean, there's a lot that I can learn from that, but, from the source himself, why did you choose that name and why did you choose that motto? What does that say to your coaching method, how you program, and your relationship with your team and your clients?
Yeah, redemption kind of came along in a multifaceted way. The first one is like the concept of redemption is a gospel message, which is important to me. The second is that I have a lot of masters athletes that are bouncing back from things. I've had plenty of conversations of like, hey, I just had a shoulder surgery and now I want to get back into it. Like I need to, do this, or I am now a masters athlete and I can't train the way that I want to, or I don't think I'll ever make the games again, or like all these kind of doubts that come in and creep in as you get older. And so I think redemption made sense in that it's like, hey, no, we're going to rewrite our story. Like stop telling yourself that you can't do these things anymore just
I
because
see.
you're 45 or 50 or 55. Like, no, we can do these things. And with good training protocols, we're going to get you to where you want to be. So, and then the third one was like more, okay, well, now I'm off on my own, and this is a
Mhm.
great opportunity to be able to redeem myself.
Mhm.
You know, step away from a company that I've been with for a long time. That wasn't a very clean separation. It was a really rough separation.
Mhm.
And to just, like kind of clear the air there. Like I love every single person there. It was like clearly just between me and the owner, but that, he chose some things that I thought were wrong and we
Mhm.
disagreed with. And so we split, but because of that, that was a painful time. And so it was like, okay, redemption is a great name for this because now I can
Mhm.
go off and do what I know is right, and I'm going to continue to do the right thing, make the right choices, and lead the right way. So it kind of all those three things kind of all came into it, and that's why I chose that name.
Cool. And just hearing just from you, saying it right now, and watching a previous podcast about the separation between you and training think tank. That's not going to be really the focus of this conversation, but I think one thing that struck me about this is kind of your openness to be vulnerable about something like that. Where I mean, the closest thing that I can think of in my own life is like if I had a rough breakup, right? And then there's friends on both sides, right? It's like, who do I stay friends with? Even if my friends broke up and I don't know who to be friends with anymore, and it's kind of uncomfortable for everyone involved because it's like I don't want to show any favoritism. I want to keep in touch with both sides. Do we invite them both to a party, that stuff like that? But you being communicative about it and really open and and I guess the big thing to me is like not saying ill will on either side. Like that's been really, I guess, really cool to see that kind of maturity and that level headedness. Yeah, I mean, just how does that speak to kind of you and your values?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it wasn't easy, right?
Yeah.
And there's still things that I would love to say, but it's not worth it. And I have
Mm,
already forgiven Max and what he did. Like it doesn't like to me, it's better to live in forgiveness and live in with love toward him. And
mm,
that's all of that. If I do that well, then it
yeah,
sets an example again for what I believe. And that's what I've chosen to do. And again, like I'm going to be completely honest, like that's not easy because there are plenty of things that I would like to say, but at the end of the
sure.
day, it's like this is the right thing to do. And the
Hmm.
other thing too is that those people, the people I worked with for the last 10 years are some of my best friends. I hang out with them
Hmm.
still. Like we've gone to dinner multiple times. I'm on the phone with them all the time because they're my best friends. And so it has nothing to do with the people there. And I don't want to sever any of those relationships. So it's like this weird breakup just with two people, but everyone else is still close friends, and
Yeah.
it doesn't change anything for me.
Cool. Well, I mean, again, just thank you for coming on here, and I really want to get into it with the master's programming. So myself, like I said, I'm 35. No, I'm 35. I was 35. I'm almost 40. I'll be turning 40 at the end of this year. So this idea of being a master's athlete is very much something that's on the back of my mind and the front of my mind, depending on how I wake up. So I think I don't know. This is my story with realizing where I am as a master's athlete. Regardless of my sport, is like I just wake up and I feel more banged up than I used to be. Right? I could have a terrible night's sleep in my 20s and still be able to go into the next day and squat heavy or something like that. Today, if I have less than 6 hours of sleep, I'm not even going to try because I just know it can feel it in my joints and everything. And that was something that I had to realize. One thing that I don't know is in your experience training masters athletes, do they realize that kind of ahead of time before shit hits the fan? Or does this seem more like they kind of learn the hard way and then figure out, okay, I need to change something?
I think there's it's probably 50-50 now. It
Yeah.
used to be like 90-10. Everyone would just train so hard that they'd break themselves and then
Yeah.
eventually reach out and say, like, I'm broken. And it's funny, that's, kind of how we made a name with Masters athletes at Training Think Tank. I ran the
Mm,
Masters program and, for the first couple of years, it was slow rolling. we weren't getting a ton of masters athletes, but
Mm,
eventually, probably around 2020, 2021, people started reaching out and or joining our group program and
mm,
saying, "Hey, I came on because I just listened to the podcast where you're talking about shoulder pain or,
yeah.
hip pain or whatever, because we kind of always had that niche of like, let's kind of focus in on people's problems and to help solve them because we knew
Mm,
in CrossFit people were always looking for those solutions.
yeah.
And so I'd have a conversation with them and they're like, yeah, I mean, my training over the last 4 or 5 years has been with X, Y, or Z program, but like they're just
Mm,
doing hard metcons every single day. Or, you mentioned about yourself, and I've done the same thing, by the way, of like, well, yeah, maybe I'm a master's athlete, but I'm going to do what the 20-year-old's doing. Why not? Like I can still hit all the RX
yeah.
loads and the RX weights, but it's like, as we know, it's a little bit harder to recover when you're 35 or 39 versus when you're
Yep.
18 or 20.
Yeah.
And so then those people kept reaching out, and then eventually we built like this pretty solid stable of masters athletes.
Mm,
In 2020, we probably had maybe one or two like age group semifinal athletes. And when I left in 2024, I had over 70 semifinal athletes in that
mm,
program, which is just absolutely insane. But a lot of that it had nothing to do with my programming. It just had to do with so many masters athletes just needed a place where they could get safe and effective programming
yeah.
without breaking them before semifinals happened,
Right. Right.
And
I
and
mean,
I think that was the tendency.
that's I mean, that's what I've been figuring out is the number of metcons I do in a week is probably reduced quite a bit since I started. Because when you start CrossFit, it's like I'd love to do this every day if I could, right? Because it's so exciting, it's so new, it's so novel. There's so many skills that you could learn. But now it's like it comes at a price. And CrossFit just inherently is going to be something where there's a lot of volume, there's a lot of, you know, global and local fatigue depending on your movements. But it's a lot. And if you're going to do, for example, box programming or anything like that on a daily basis, I wonder, you know, on average, and blanket statements on considering, does your typical masters athlete, do they do too much CrossFit on average?
Yeah, I would guess that that's probably a yes. Or it's not necessarily how much, CrossFit they're doing. It's at the intensity and volume that they're
Mm,
doing it. I think there can be CrossFit movements and combos and even intervals almost every day of the week, but you
yeah.
have to have some kind of undulating structure of, okay, today's going to be high intensity, but the next 2 days are
Mm,
going to be moderate or low intensity, and continue to structure the programming that way so
mm,
that recovery is still the focal point of the training. I said this
definitely.
earlier, but I think that's what most people miss is like you could train as hard as you want. Like I'm fine with
Mm,
that. But if you're not
yeah.
recovering, it doesn't matter. And the
Mm,
same thing goes of like if you're not training that hard, but you're still not recovering, it doesn't matter. The
yeah.
recovery is key for either side of the spectrum.
Right.
And so I think it's just promoting that as much as you can, giving people the knowledge like we talked about that they
Mm,
need to do some extra work on their own nutrition and sleep and mobility routines or whatever it may be that's allowing them to get back into a parasympathetic state and then
mm.
actually recover when they're not in the gym. I think that's just as important as high quality training principles.
Okay. And one of the things, when I do these podcasts and I have people of your experience and profession, to be able to offer that advice, can you like walk me through what would be a typical training week, or what could be a typical training week for a master's athlete with those things considered? Like, where does intensity come in? Where does, skill, and less intense work? Where does conditioning factor into the week? So what would like a typical training week, I guess, from Monday to Sunday, look like for your typical master's athlete who wants to perform well at a high level?
Yeah. Yeah. I'll give you a structure, but I will say that it should depend based on the athlete's age, their
Mhm.
training history, their
Right.
their biological age too, which I think most people think is like, well, if it's 35, it's 35. But like, no, some people, they may be 35, but their biological age, if they actually test it, maybe 40 or 45 or 50 because of the way that
Yeah.
they've lived before. So
Right.
all of those things play a role into that. Um, Typically, though, let's just say that we had like, let's do middle of the road, like a 45-year-old athlete that has decent movement patterns and they want to
Mhm.
make a semifinal. So they
Yeah.
need to be doing some hard CrossFit. This
Right.
time of year, they're doing the most CrossFit that they've done throughout the year. So, like, if it's
Absolutely.
open prep, I'm doing some CrossFit touch every single day, but the volume and intensity, again, are undulating or changing throughout the
Mhm.
week. I like a split where it's like, let's say Monday is a higher intensity day, then Tuesday would be a lower intensity day, Wednesday would be a moderate intensity day. So that there's some recovery on a Tuesday, going into Wednesday, they can still do some moderate intensity, but it's not going to be like a full max effort metabolic conditioning session with heavy strength work and so on and so forth. And then Friday or Saturday, one of those can again be a higher intensity day, and the other one needs to be a lower intensity. So essentially, it's 2 high intensity days,
I
2 lower intensity days, and 1 moderate intensity. And then Thursdays and Sundays, like in our typical CrossFit split, which is what
Mm,
most group programs follow, those are just true recovery sessions. Maybe they're doing movement mobility work. Some programs will have like a zone 2 session. I'm actually a little scared to do that in a group program, because the tendency for most people is they
mm,
see zone 2 and they actually are going at a zone 3 or even 4 effort on those days,
yeah.
which means they're not recovering between sessions. Like, it's just too hard, especially for an older athlete. And
Mm,
so I try to encourage athletes to just stay away from any conditioning work, even if they think it's zone 2. If they want to do something, it must be at a
yeah.
walk pace where they can have a full conversation, and then just mobility work. As
Okay.
far as the actual details of like a session,
Mm,
this is where it becomes a little bit more complicated. And this is why I
okay.
think one-on-one programming can really help a master's athlete, in that depending on the athlete's needs, you really need to bias the programming for masters athletes more than you would a younger athlete,
Okay.
because the tendency for higher level masters athletes is there's still these big holes in their game. There are very few that are extremely well rounded. So we want to look at their lowest hanging fruit. I always talk about like these dials on like a music board or something like that. If they have
Okay.
like on a 1 to 10 scale, a bunch of 7s and 8s, which are pretty good, but then they have like these ones down here. We want to make sure we're
Mm,
driving those ones up. So we need to make sure we're biasing that in their programming. And then the other thing too is that we need to make sure that they have all of the skills that are dialed in. So like if it's,
right.
ring muscle ups or handstand walking or handstand push-ups, those tend to go as you get older because of mobility issues, or maybe they just never picked up that skill because
Mm,
like they started CrossFit a little bit later on, so they
right.
never
Right.
developed that as an RX athlete. Those would need to be dialed in as well. And so those two things, you can't just hammer every single day with, okay, it's going to be strength, and then we're going to do a bunch of skill, and then we're going to do some aerobic work, and then we're going to do a Metcon or some CrossFit work. That's just
Mm,
almost too much to come back from. You can give those options in a group program. And in fact, like the group program that we have these daily options where there's a skill option, and then
mm,
there's an aerobic capacity option, then there's a CrossFit option and some strength work. But we tell our athletes, hey, you're picking based on whatever the limiters that you have, so that you're continuing
mm,
to work on those things, so that we can drive those dials up in that same analogy that I just gave, so that you're
yeah.
kind of just average across the board. And if you're average across the board, as you know in CrossFit, that means you probably do pretty well, right? And
Yeah.
then the best
Sure.
are they're just above average. It's not like,
Yeah.
unless you're Rich Froning or Tia Toomey or Matt
Mm,
Frazier, most people aren't tens on the dial on every single
right.
lift and every single
Right.
gymnastic skill and every single conditioning test. So that's what we're trying to get. We're trying to get everyone to that like average or above average place.
So that structure, that sounds quite good. One thing that I wonder, and when we get into the nitty gritty, right? And this is, I'm asking you because I've heard you talk about these details, and you've made spreadsheets, and you've looked at data sets of, what's the diminishing returns on people's ability to lift as they age. So I'm going to ask you a question that I want to see what it looks like. Is, let's say we're doing something where we're talking about power output, right? We're talking about assault bike intervals. You'll do a 30-second sprint, and let's say your typical open athlete will have 60 seconds of recovery before they get on again. For a master's athlete, and I'm sure this changes by age, but does that recovery window need to be longer, and by how much that you've seen?
Well, it depends on if you're trying to drive performance adaptations, like they have to
Mm,
perform soon and you're just trying to replicate the sport, it's
yeah.
a sport specific progression, or if you're trying to actually drive physiological adaptations.
Okay.
If we're trying to do like true power output or like
Mm,
maximal power work where you're driving that adaptation, there's a study that I'd actually just read. They did 3 sprints, and this was like with moderately trained athletes. So it's going to be probably different with a well-trained athlete, but just to give you an
okay.
idea,
Mm,
they did a 20-second assault bike sprint.
mm,
They rested 20 minutes and they
okay.
repeated that 3 times. And in 20 minutes, their glycogen stores were still at 50% of what they were after that first sprint.
Oh, wow.
So they're not even close to recovered at that second
Jeez.
one. And the same thing on their third one. So
Yeah.
you really need like full rest time. Not that you'd rest 20 minutes between these sprints, but the point is like to actually drive maximal power or absolute speed or something like that, you
Mm,
need full rest. And you would do
mm,
that in your off season. You wouldn't do that in season. So for athletes that are like, I need to get faster or create more speed or maximal power, probably not the best time to do it is right now, unless you know like you're
Yeah.
going to the games and so you have like 5 months to train still, and
Sure. Sure.
that's what you're training for. That's like more of an off season. Hey, we're trying to drive these physiological adaptations. In
Mm,
season, then you're just, at least again, this is just the way that I coach and train
mhm.
athletes. I'm thinking about how can we get them prepared for the sport specific tests that come out.
Okay.
And if the sport specific test is a 20-minute AMRAP, there is no rest, and we got to work on getting them through that and get as many reps as possible. So their training would actually look pretty similar to the 25-year-old that has to do the
Okay.
same test, maybe just with different loading,
Yeah.
at this time of year. Now, if you pull this back even 2 months ago, maybe like
Mm,
December or something like that, we still had like a 10-week runway. There's
mm,
more interval based training. There's more movement efficiency training. And what I mean by that is we're trying to refine the movement speed and use less effort per rep for each movement. So we're doing a lot of
mm.
training where it's focused on like, hey, if you're doing a wall ball, let's practice exactly how you're going to catch the ball
I
and how
see.
you can get just below parallel and then come
Yeah.
back out without bottoming out in the squat. Like these little things that most people don't think about, but
Mhm.
especially as a master's athlete, every little detail matters
Yeah.
so that you're being as efficient as possible, using less effort per rep than your counterparts.
Mhm.
And then as it gets closer to the season, everything kind of starts to look more and more like
Right.
everyone else's training. And through
Right.
the open, it'll look similar with the CrossFit test that we do, but the recovery time is just probably extended a little bit more. Like a
Okay.
Saturday session during the open will be a little bit
Okay.
easier than my 25-year-old athlete.
So it sounds like, I mean, the peaking time is going to need to be the same because the open doesn't change for no matter what kind of athlete you are, right? But it's the
Yeah.
length at which your approach is, right? Like with a younger athlete with that recoverability, that person can stay at high intensity much earlier because they can stay at that intensity longer and recover from it. As you get older, you want to keep that window tighter because the longer you're in that high performance window, the more wear and tear relative to a younger athlete. Is that what you mean, generally
Yeah,
speaking?
that's exactly right. You can't. I mean, even for the younger athlete, you don't want them to be peaked all year. It's
Yeah,
just really hard to do that, and
exactly.
almost impossible, I would assume.
Yeah.
Maybe there's some outliers like a Fraser or Froning, like I said,
Mm,
but most of us can't handle that. And in particular, it's not worth trying to handle with the masters athlete who has holes in their game anyhow. I want to
yeah.
get back to the off season as quick as I can if they don't make it, so that we can work on those holes and again
Mm,
drive those dials up and get them to where they want to be for the next year or for the next competition. If you
right.
just try to keep them in performance mode all year around, then
Yep.
they would burn out. And then you're going to
Yep.
see like maybe you would see some gains like this, it goes up, but then they're just going to
Mm,
plateau or like drop off that cliff, which we've
mm,
all had, right? Like you wake up and
yeah.
you're just like, I don't have it today. Well,
Yep.
that happens day in and day out for multiple weeks in a row if you overtrain. And that's a really hard hole to dig out of.
I wanted to quickly interrupt this episode with a quick shout out to our sponsors, Today Well Spent. I've been using this journal for 2 years and it has made a massive impact on my physical, but mostly my mental well-being. It is a guided journal backed by neuro and behavioral science, which I actually didn't know at the time. It has questions for you to answer at the start of the day, at the end of the day, end of every week, end of every month. And it's brought so much self-awareness to me of the things that positively and negatively impact my life. So if you're someone who cares about your physical and your mental well-being, which I think you do because you listen to this podcast, then go and grab yourself a Today Well Spent. Use the discount code THEPROCESS, one word in capitals, to get your discount.
Um, that brings up an interesting point, right? Like, of course, you can't peak all year, so you have to find your opportunities where it's going to be important for you to do that. And at least in Asia, and this is me speaking as an master's athlete, there are two potential peaks that I could have. One would be for the open to do as best as I can in these next 3 weeks. The other opportunity locally is in October, November. In Shanghai, there's essentially like our version of the CrossFit Games in China, where it's this really big show, and we rent out like a well-known stadium, and we do 2 to 3 days of workouts, and this is for every level. If you encounter a master's athlete who says, "Look, I have these opportunities," do you need to figure out which one you're biasing, or is it possible to kind of peak in those two ends of the season, um, with that recovery window, peaking window, those things considered as a master's athlete?
For sure. Yeah, twice a year is pretty easy to do and very doable unless someone's like
Okay.
pretty broken. And I think they
Mhm.
can even do more than that. Like I was always very careful, maybe as a younger coach, but 3 or 4 times a year, you can prime someone in a couple of weeks to be ready for that, especially if you have
Mhm.
good base training. I think, again, my point earlier was just like these athletes that are doing a qualifier every other week.
Yeah.
It's 20 or 25 in a year. And now with the season, that's kind of what it looks like. Like
Yep.
I've seen athletes, they did like Wadapalooza qualifiers, then Legends qualifiers, then Fittest of the
Mhm.
Coast qualifiers, then they competed at Legends, and then they competed at Fittest of the Coast, and then they did the Monster Game qualifiers that just happened a couple of weeks ago, and now they're going to go do Monster Games. That's very hard to do that and
Yeah.
continue to perform. Some people, again, may be able to do it, but I think for most people, I would just pick one or two. And if you want to do the qualifiers as the benchmark, but not peak for them, that's probably a good way to train, right?
Mhm.
Like it's, hey, these just came out and I have 3 weeks to do them. Let's just throw them in my training for fun as a benchmark,
Mhm.
but I'm not really worried about how I score. As a coach, that's really good data to get.
Yeah.
And it allows me to kind of see, like, as a non-peaked athlete, how are you in comparison to those that are really training hard for that
Mhm.
particular qualifier?
I see. And then, with the season structure as it is, now we have, of course, you have CrossFit in the Open and the games, and you have people who are vying for those. You have the World Fitness Project that sounds like it's kind of almost going at the same schedule, even though it's purported to be, not competing in terms of schedule. It looks like it kind of is. Um, and it's just so many local competitions. There are some athletes, I understand, masters especially, where they'll do one season of high level competition and they'll take the next season they won't even do it, right? Where they see recoverability as an entire year of high performing and then an entire year of, I guess, recoverability and skill building. What is your position on something like that, where you have an on year and an off year as a masters athlete, especially because masters athletes are in age brackets, like, you know if all skills are the same, a younger person on that age group would fare better than an older person in that age group. How do you feel about that type of structure for an athlete?
Yeah, I always encourage athletes the first 3 years that they age up into an age group. So, like, let's say you're 39. Once you go to 40, like 40, 41, and 42, you shouldn't skip any years. You should just like focus. If your goal was like, I need to make or I want to make a semifinal, or I
Yeah.
want to make the games, those are your perfect years to do
Okay.
that. 44, and then like if you have like a weird birthday where you're 45 but you still can't get into the
Yeah.
45, like those are bad years because now you're the oldest in your age group and it's going to be really
Mm,
hard. I mean, some people can still do it, we see that, but the
yeah.
Kyle Ruth pulled the data on this for 35 to 39. I think there were
Mm,
only like 2 or 3 39 year olds that qualified for the games this year, and then everyone else was
okay.
35, something, it was something
Okay.
crazy like that, right?
Yeah.
But that makes
Jeez.
sense, of course.
Yeah.
And there's a huge difference. I did an analysis, it's probably not online anymore, but of masters athletes, and I ran the numbers of the top 100 athletes in each age group
Mm,
for the open and then for the age group qualifier, and then I looked at all the statistics from like 4 straight opens, 4 straight online qualifiers, and maybe even the games. I can't remember, this was probably like 3 years ago, but
mm,
the drop off in strength from one age group to the next was 9%, and the drop off in metcon capacity is kind of what I termed it, but basically like how many reps they were getting was around the
yeah.
same. So there's this big drop off from group to group. So you think about it, like
Okay.
even in 4 years you're going to have some drop off. So if you were to skip, it probably makes sense to like rest up when you're 39, wait until you turn 40, and then when you're in 40 to 44, that's go time. But
Nice.
even in that time, the sport of CrossFit, like there's a
Mm,
skill to competing and dealing with the chaos. So
mm,
even in that off year, I tell people to pick a couple of local competitions, something that's in person where they have to expose themselves to the chaos and
mm,
expose themselves to getting no reps and the butterflies that happen when you're standing in the corral, and how you warm up, how you eat on competition day, all those little things that if you don't get practice in that off year, it becomes really hard to do it well the first time you have to do it when it really matters.
yeah. And that's kind of where I'm at right now. Like, my prioritization of the CrossFit style training is much lower than what it was last year, and I guess this is going to be kind of my off year because, like, I'm picking up aches and pains that don't seem to want to go away. So, like, I'm just gonna take a little break, and that's going to be where I'm at currently. Which brings me into like another thing that all I guess CrossFit athletes are considering right now because of the popularity of it. is like more endurance type of events, right? You have high rocks where there's versions of CrossFit movements, of course. Then you have people that are doing half marathons, triathlons, endurance runs where they're really getting out of the gym and trying to see what they can do outside of, a CrossFit competition. Where do you stand on using that as I guess, a way to enhance their training or enhance their performance, especially as a masters athlete? Because that volume of that, I feel my knees every running session.
Yeah, yeah. I guess I'll give you an I don't know if it helps. My guess and the
Yeah.
way that I stand on this is that CrossFit's not an endurance sport. So doing a bunch of long endurance work is not going to help you.
Mm,
CrossFit's a muscular endurance sport. So it's
mm,
local muscular endurance that matters most.
mm.
Obviously, you have to be quote unquote aerobic, but
Sure.
that's not the telltale sign of who the best CrossFitters are. If you look at the
Mm,
guys and the girls that have won year after year after year, they are most impressive with their muscular endurance and with their
mm,
movement efficiency and not just their aerobic capacity. So
mm.
I know everyone says like engines win championships. You heard that, from the old OPT model, and we hear
Yeah.
that from people all the time, but it's just like that's just not, at least the way that I've seen it, it's just not true. Like that's
Mm,
not the case. Like, if you test everyone's VO2 max, it's not the person with the highest VO2 max. It's the person that can handle the amount of contractions that you have to do in the sport. And
right.
the other thing too to keep in mind is that the tests aren't endurance. They've never been true endurance tests. We
Yeah.
very rarely, except at the games as an individual, have we seen anything over 60 minutes.
Mm,
Most tests are between 8 and 14 minutes, and that is not an endurance test. And most tests in 8 to 14-minute range have skills in them where you have to have really good technical proficiency or
mm,
really good local endurance. That's why people say my grip blew up, my biceps blew up, my lats blew up, my legs blew up. So while yes, your heart and your lungs have to work properly, it's not really about whoever is just like the best at, taking in oxygen that is winning the
yeah.
sport is my point.
Yeah. So it's basically it's when it comes down to it, based on your data, it's a matter of, I guess, strength, endurance, their capacity to keep hitting that volume and stave off failure. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I mean, truly just muscular endurance. Like,
Mm,
can they handle repeated contractions with at the local level? Like, can their
mm,
forearms withstand holding on to the bar and the pull-up bar? Can their lats and their biceps withstand doing 150 chest to bars over and over and over again? Can their
yeah.
legs withstand doing, 150 thrusters in a workout or go back and forth
Mm,
between thrusters and chest to bar pull-ups? The
mm,
limiting factor is never going to be your heart in that case when it's a 7-minute workout.
mm,
It's going to, at least for the winners, it's going to be who has the most or the best, local muscle endurance. And because of that, like I think that's where we see these champions like Rich Froning. He always lose those running events or the long events, but then he would crush everything
yeah.
else. And the other thing too is that I wouldn't be saying this if CrossFit was just a bunch of monostructural tests. If it
Mm,
was a 60-minute run and a 45-minute row and then a 60-minute C2 bike,
yeah.
or some kind of like Ironman type workout, whatever, then yeah, that's an endurance sport. But CrossFit, even at the games, is testing a bunch of strength work and then a lot of really short, again, that 8 to 14-minute time domain is typically what we see. And in
Mm,
particular, it's exactly what we see for masters athletes at the Legends Championships, the Masters Games this past year. All the events were short because they had to be. There's so many divisions, they can't have a long event. And so
sure.
there's really not a reason to just train. There are reasons to do a lot of zone 2 work and train long
Mm,
aerobic work. I'm not saying that.
mm,
There's not a reason to do sport specific work at 60-minute or 90-minute time domains because you think it's going to come out. It just probably will never come out.
yeah.
And so I think it's better to hedge your bets again in that shorter time domain. Really, anything less than 20 minutes is a better place to be because if there's 12 tests, probably 10 to 11 of them will be in that time domain and only one of
Mm.
them will be in that, 20 plus minute domain.
Okay. So like speaking of tests, and this is something that I've been floating around, just the idea of it is for the games itself, for your open athletes, there is the definition of the fittest, and that the tests are as they are. Uh, if we're trying to look for the fittest person, the fittest human at these age groups, are the tests, should they be the same as what you would see in the games level with the open athletes, or should there be some adjustments? Let's say you were controlling and you're programming the events. would they look different for the master's level? Because it kind of does to an extent, right? Like, especially because, you see less ring muscle ups at a certain age because of, the ability to be doing that as you age is going to be less and less, and the risk is going to be higher than the reward. If you were programming for these events for masters, would it look different from what it is now?
Um, yeah, again, I'm sorry, I'm going to say I don't know. I would have to really think about
Yeah.
how we would frame it. I guess that to answer it a different way is the test should 100% be modified from 35 to 39 to
Mm,
55 to 59 athletes. And they
yeah.
are, but they probably should be modified even more because you're
Okay.
not eliciting the same stimulus if you're doing the same test with 35 to 39-year-olds as you
Mm.
are with the 55 to 59 or 60 to 64 or 65 to 69 groups.
Interesting. Can you
And I
break that
saw
up? Can you break that down as an example?
yeah, so like this year at the games, they had they did like I'm gonna get the workout wrong. It may actually no, it was the standard. They did the standard is what they did. They
Mm,
did the snatch, or sorry, clean and jerk, muscle ups, and snatch, and then they did
right.
a similar workout with just fewer ring muscle ups with the 55 to 59 group. But
Mm,
when the 55 to 59 group did it, they were just obviously way slower. Like it's just a
mm,
completely different workout. So you're
I
not
see.
getting the same stimulus with that or the running and deadlift workout. They modified the loads, but even the running um, is so much slower for the 55 to 59. They
Mm,
may be better off like even shortening the distance even more than what they did,
I
just
see.
if they want to keep the same stimulus. If they don't mind that, and it's just like, hey, everyone's doing the same workout, which is true. Like all 55 to 59 males and females are doing the same workout
Mm,
against each other, then I'm fine with that. And that's why I said I just don't know how you would modify it. I'd have to
yeah,
really
sure.
break that down and think about what would make a fair test. The other thing too is that I've never thought that CrossFit's tests are these like this is the standard for finding the
Mm,
fittest on earth. But I don't know what that is, and that's why I don't ever criticize their tests.
sure.
We used to do these podcasts at Training Think Tank, and I'd be like, I have a hard time criticizing because can we answer what those tests
Yeah,
would be?
yeah.
Like they have to be kind of crazy and fun to keep people involved and get
Mm,
people excited about doing them. And there has to be some novelty there, which I think Castro always did a good job of.
mm,
But that doesn't mean that you're truly finding the fittest with these tests, right?
right. Um, yeah, I mean, I just love asking these questions. And I think I love asking you these questions because you're such an information and data-driven and research-driven person. And it's always really eye-opening to hear you talk about, like those 9%, cuts of strength and power and endurance. And all this data informs the training plan that you set out, right? So, can you share, like right now, what kind of research, what kind of data sets are you looking at right now to inform how you are going to be programming in the future? Is there anything specifically you're looking at?
Yeah, I use a master spreadsheet that basically has collected all of the open quarterfinal, semifinal, and games workouts. I
Mm,
pull those into like one data set so that I can see again from age group to age group,
yeah,
like what the contraction volume is. How many toes to bar does someone need to be prepared for 35 to
I see.
39 versus 50 to 54 or 65 plus? What movement combos are tested the most? What time domains, which we just talked about, are tested the
Mm,
most? Which
mm,
time domains are tested the least? Which movement combos are tested the least? All of those things, like as you know, and it gets updated each year. So, like in
yep.
2024, these new tests came out, and we update it and kind of see what are the new trends in the sport, and then we'll have the same thing this year, 2025. There'll be new trends in the sport, and we keep doing that. And that's just a way to inform us on how we program, and in particular when we program for sport specific work, because we want to hedge our bets as coaches to make sure that we're touching the combos that are most commonly tested, right?
Mm,
Like thruster and chest bar pull up
yeah,
have been tested over and over and over again. If you don't touch that throughout the year and then it comes out, you're doing a disservice to your athletes
I see.
because it's one of the things that it's just like a standard in the sport, right? And
Mm,
the same thing of like I always used to give this example. Swimming is great. I love when people want to go and swim. But
yeah.
if you're just an open athlete, there's not really a point to swim unless it's just like active recovery or like you're a really
Mm,
good swimmer and you can actually
mm,
make some cardiovascular adaptations by swimming. I would rather an open athlete do all the open movements and practice
mm,
those so they can get really good at the open, if that's their goal, right? So that's kind of what I mean of like, if you're looking at all the movements that have been tested,
yeah.
swimming will never be tested in the open. If you care about the open, it doesn't really matter. Running
Mm,
has only been tested if it's a shuttle run. So instead of doing a lot of long distance runs leading up to the open, we're just doing a lot of shuttle runs leading up to the open. if that's your goal. But if you're a games athlete, then you are swimming and you are doing a lot of long running and you're doing a lot of auto object work. It just changes based on what the athlete's goals are and obviously the time of year.
Also, like with the idea of one thing that you said is that the data changes, right? The data evolves from year to year as we get information, as like the population changes within the sport. And, even at the open level, comparing 2007 to today, like the average max snatch for men versus now is just, these are two different worlds, right? Like people have gotten much stronger, but they've also moved more efficiently. Like their snatch looks so much better now than it did back in Aromas, right? Are we seeing a similar trend in masters athletes? Like, for example, does your 45 to 49, is the average clean and jerk stronger than it was maybe 5 years ago? Yeah. Or are you still seeing those diminishing returns and it kind of tables off once you reach the masters level?
No, 100%. They're way stronger, and there's probably been bigger jumps there, or the same jump at least as the individuals over the last 5 or 6 years. Masters athletes are just way stronger, but it's not just that masters athletes are getting stronger, because a lot of them are like slowly getting stronger. It's that new people are coming into those age groups. So again, like Will Morad won the 35 to 39 division this past year at the games. He came in from the year before he was at the regular games. So now you have this freak athlete that goes into the Masters games. And of course, like he can still snatch 290 pounds and he can clean whatever it is, 350. That changes all the data, right? Because now you have these new people and the same thing, like, one of the guys that I know well, Jimmy Woodard, he's the guy that front squatted like 460 or something at the Masters games. He's same thing. He was a semifinal level athlete that's just a freak of nature, very, very strong, that came into it. And the same thing's happening. Like these people that have been training for a long time now are graduating to 45 to 49 or 50 to 54 that are just extremely strong. And I think that there are better movers, like you said, and better training protocols that are getting people that have been in the sport for a long time even stronger. So the masters are getting stronger at the top end.
All right. And so thinking about that, and you take on a client and, because of the nature of what you do and that you take on a lot of, high performing masters athletes, how do you, I guess, if they really want to be at the games level, but their strength is just not there, how do you usually kind of ramp them into getting into contention, or just at a point where, look, man, like this is the best you're going to do is not going to be games level just because the standards are at this point. Let's shift you on over to local competitions, or just how do you lay out that information for them taking on a new client?
Yeah, I try to be as honest as I can be and tell someone it may not be, you're not good enough. What I like to do is, hey, the max snatch in your age group is, for a male, maybe 245, and your max snatch is 155. You have 90 pounds to go. That's going to be very challenging. So you got two options here. One, we kind of cut out all of the other additional conditioning work and we really focus on your strengths for the next year, which isn't that fun. I mean, if it's your goal, then let's do it. Like I'm on board for that. I love to see you get stronger. Or we can still do some concurrent training, maybe add in some conditioning work on these 3 or 4 days. We'll add in some skill work, and let's do these competitions throughout the year. And let's see if it's something that you really like. And then after that, we can have the conversation again. Well, I still want to give the athlete the choice of what they want to do. And I don't want to tell them that they can't do it. I'm sure people can gain, maybe not 90 pounds, but gain 30, 40 pounds on their snatch.
Sure.
And I've seen people do a lot of that. I've had athletes, I have an athlete who's now a perennial semifinal athlete, obviously younger, but when she came to me, she couldn't do a muscle up. And, she's made 3 semifinals in a row, which is just insane. Like if you work hard and you keep your head down and you listen to your coach, then I think that you can still make those gains.
And how about for yourself, for your training of athletes? It does sound like you have a lot of high performing athletes that are at the semis level or above. Do you also train athletes who don't even prioritize CrossFit, or is that more your focus right now as a coach?
For sure. I have athletes that don't do CrossFit at all. I have
Okay.
athletes that are in the military or the soccer mom or someone that got out of CrossFit. A lot of those
Mm,
that are like me that maybe aren't competitive anymore, but they still enjoy doing a CrossFit workout every once in a while. But their main focus is either aesthetics or just feeling good. They want to be able to run around with their kids in 20 years from now. So it's like, hey, how can you just make me fit and strong?
mm,
And I love working with those people because one, their training is usually a little bit more fun. Like there's more flexibility. Like you can do some
okay.
fun stuff with them. That's not necessarily CrossFit related, but they just like I said earlier, they have great perspective. They're going into the gym
Hmm.
because they truly want to enrich all the other aspects of their life. They're like, hey, I got a meeting that's really important, and so I can't kill myself in the gym right now. I just want to get a
Yeah, okay.
sweat and do some strength work, and then I need to get into this meeting. Like it's just a different world for them as opposed to the CrossFit athlete.
Nice. That being said, even regardless of your priorities, you're still dealing with, I guess, mostly masters athletes. And one of the things that I just got to ask out because I don't do a good job of it myself is stuff like mobility and activation, right? And I got to assume, just because how I feel, that the the length of time that you need to do that and the focus on that is going to be much higher at the master's level. What do you usually do to get people kind of onboarded with that? If they don't necessarily enjoy it? Is it like suck it up and do it, or let's create a structure that makes it feel like a workout, or if you know what I'm getting at?
Yeah. If they're a games athlete or they're someone that's aspiring to be a games athlete, I tell them they got to suck it up and figure it out. Like you can't tell me
Yeah.
that you want to make the highest level and you're not willing to put the work in to be at the highest level. And I know
Mm,
that seems harsh, but that's kind of like I've done it long enough and I've had enough games athletes to know that
yeah.
the people that aren't willing to do that stuff, they won't make the games. Like it's just not going
Mm,
to happen. And the people that maybe don't seem talented enough, but they do put in the work, they're like on the bubble. A lot of them end up squeaking into the games because they're doing all the little details. And in
mhm,
particular with the masters athletes, if you clean up some movement patterns, right? If you can create like movement access, like I can actually get into this in
yeah.
range, all of a sudden it makes that movement so much easier. And then it like unlocks all these other things that they wanted to be able to do with their training. So I tell them like straight up. Now, for someone that just is like they're doing this for fun, but they keep
Mm,
having chronic shoulder pain or hip
mm,
pain or something, and I see there's a deficiency, I'll try to add it into their actual training structure. So it may look
mm,
like, they're doing their regular squats and they're doing some cleans, but they're doing some accessory work that is like, okay, now you're doing these Cossack squats and hip switches and like pigeon, different pigeon variations. And I just throw it into the middle of their training where it's kind of like, well, I guess I have to do this, right? It's not like at the end
nice.
or the beginning. So that's a really good way, and I think that people usually will create some buy-in there. And once they do it for a little while, they notice that their hip feels better, or their shoulder feels better, or at least they're recovering a little bit faster and actually making gains in the areas where they want to make gains. The other thing I'd mention too is it's not just like length of time. I think it's more just frequency. It's
Mm,
continuing to touch the thing that needs to get better. So if it's a shoulder, frequently do the mobility or the
I see.
movement work that you need to do on the shoulder, as opposed to it just being like one long 1 hour session, because I don't
Mm,
think you get much bang for your buck after probably 10 or 15 minutes of doing something.
mhm. I guess the other part is like, oh, I have my shoulder mobility range good now. I guess I don't need to do this anymore. And then suddenly
Yeah,
or gradually the poor range of motion comes back. It's like, well, because it's something that you got to maintain and you have to actively do the work still, right? And create a
totally. And
habit.
I've done that. Yeah, I've done that too. Like I have to continually work on my ankles and in particular my left knee because I've had multiple
Mm,
surgeries. And
right.
if I stay on it, and it doesn't have to be long, like I said, like 3 to 5 minutes a day, like it feels pretty good. But if it goes
Mm,
like, I was traveling this past week and I didn't do anything, and I'm like, man, why is my knee getting stiff? Well,
right.
that's why. Like you do have to stay on that. And that's part of the process that you go through, especially as you age, where you're going to have to
Mm,
maybe have a couple more check boxes at the end of the night of like, did I do my knee and my shoulder and my ankle? But it's like, if you really want to be better, then yes, you need to check those off the list.
okay. Right on. Yeah, you just alluded to it right now. And, for all intents and purposes, if you, as a coach, you yourself, you want to take care of yourself and you want to be able to have a fulfilling life in and out of the gym. So what does your training yourself look like? Are you in any sense of the word in performance mode, or like what is your typical training? What are your goals and how are you working towards them?
Yeah, I'm definitely not in performance mode in that I'm not planning to compete anytime soon.
Mm,
I would compete again. Like I would love to jump on like a fun local team with
mm,
an athlete, or do something like that. I don't really have any aspirations to do something by myself, but I would enjoy that. The training right now has been a little chaotic over the last month, as you can imagine. It's like we've made
yeah.
some changes. I mentioned earlier our house is
Mm,
closing this Friday, so the past couple of weeks has been pretty bad. But I've kind of gotten into a pretty good routine of where I'll wake up and try to do a 15 or 20-minute cyclical session 3 to 4 days a week,
mm,
or that'll just be like a really light strength session in the morning before the kids or my wife wakes up, and then I'll do something else in the evenings again once things kind of settle down at the house. But my main priority right now is getting work done, and then obviously spending time with the family. So my training,
mm,
it kind of it evolves each week based on what's going on with the family. So they come first, and then I just kind of figure it out after that. But I found a pretty good groove of, if I can get 3 strength training sessions in per week, I'm pretty happy. I'll do 1 or 2 CrossFit skill sessions just to maintain some of those skills. Maybe I throw
mm.
in some handstand walking, or some ring muscle ups or bar muscle ups or chest to bar
Yeah.
touches, whatever it may be. And then the rest is kind of basic cyclical work right now.
Okay. And I want you to be an example of those who have busy lives. In the last like 3 weeks, what is the shortest time window you've had to do a workout?
I did a 10-minute EMOM like 3 days ago when I was
And that's
traveling.
because that's all
Like
you
it,
had.
yeah, that was it. And just, got in and got out. And that was fine. Like that's the thing
Mm,
is, for me, it's like, okay, if I have this window, I'm going to do it and I commit to it. And I'm also not going to get frustrated. I think I
yeah.
used to get really frustrated when I didn't get a training session in. And so then I wouldn't sleep, and then the next day I wouldn't be recovered. And then I'd go and
Yeah.
try to do a long session and I would get hurt, or I wouldn't feel good
Yeah.
the entire time. So I didn't get any intensity in. So like,
Yeah.
like now it's like, that's what I mean by like having that paradigm shift, or just more perspective of like, it's okay that I only did a 10-minute session today. Like I'm still in a really good spot. And as long as I'm consistent, I'll be able to get back in a groove.
Right. It's one day and one training session within the rest of your life. How much is it going to affect you, right?
Exactly. Totally.
Right on. It's cool to hear that you're living by your example here. Like I told you, I was going to do this is just like kind of end with like a semi quick fire round, and I didn't give you the questions here, so I just want to hear just off the top of your dome. Ready?
Let's do it.
Okay. Name one coach of yours whom you truly admire. So any coach from your sporting background, your CrossFit background, just one that you truly admire.
Mike Swiler. He was my football coach in college. Just a great man, led by example, and I still remember a lot of the little sayings that he said on the sideline when we were practicing that I live by this day.
Okay, great. And I think maybe that's related to the next question I have is tell me one thing a coach told you that has stuck with you to this day. And it could be something profound or it can be something silly. Like for example, my wrestling coach, Todd Stoke, he would always tell, not me specifically, because I was never, well, he probably told me a couple of times. He would always tell me just to get my head out of my ass. And that I'm just playing grab ass. I'm not actually wrestling. I'm just like flopping around. And I don't know why, but I've applied that to life. Is like if I feel like I'm metaphorically grab assing, then I need to like pop my head out and just focus. So what for you
Okay,
was
okay.
that quote?
Well, then I'll go along those lines with something I always thought was so silly, but it actually does make a lot of sense. I had an same football team offensive coordinator that
Mm,
anytime a quarterback threw a bad pass, he would yell at the receivers, "A bad pass is an opportunity for a great catch." And basically what he's saying is like, you got to figure it out. And I
yeah,
actually remember that a lot when, I got to figure it out. So it's like, hey, something, life gave me lemons, I'm going to make lemonade kind of thing.
awesome, awesome. I like the sound of that, and I like how it is very applicable to a lot of things in our lives.
Yeah.
Um, on that note, as a coach yourself, you said you still make mistakes, and so do I, and that's what we can learn from. On that note, or anything similar or even different, what's one coaching aha moment that you had recently?
I think that probably the thing I continue to try to develop that has always been an aha is how to communicate well with clients. And I'm
Okay.
always learning new ways to communicate with them. I just read this great book called, oh gosh, now I'm blanking on it. It's a hospitality book, and now I can't even remember what it's
Oh,
called. It's
nice.
so sad. But anyhow, it's all about like giving this. Unreasonable Hospitality. That's the name of the book.
Okay.
Okay. And it's essentially saying like, you want to give the best service that someone's like, that was even unreasonable, but man, it made me feel really good. So it's like all about like making sure that someone feels a certain way. And that's what we're trying to
Mm.
deliver as coaches, which is hard to do because sometimes you get frustrated with them or they don't listen. And you're like, man, well, if they just listen, they wouldn't get hurt,
Yeah.
but it's my job every day to kind of reel them in and make sure that I'm continuing to deliver a high quality service.
Cool. That's actually something that I'm in the middle of right now. I'm reading this book that Ed gave me called The Go-Giver. It's a whole series, and one of the principles is like you definitely need to deliver more than what that person is paying for. There's a level of care and service and attention that comes with giving something of high value that's more
Yeah.
than what that person is paying for. And it doesn't mean in just like the service industry or whatever, but like just doing that in your daily life, like I didn't realize how often an opportunity like that would come and how it actually impacts me positively by doing these things.
That's exactly right.
Name one coach in any sport, any time period who you would have loved to coach you.
Tony Dungy.
Tony Dungy of the Colts.
Yeah. Yeah. He's awesome.
Yeah, let's hear it. What makes him awesome to you?
It's well because I've read his books. He wrote a couple
Okay.
books after he got it. So he also coached Tampa Bay, and then when he retired, he wrote a couple books, and one of them was just like awesome, like on mindset and how to be a champion, and also
Mm.
kind of to your point, like even in that champion mindset, how to continue to serve others, which has stuck with me. I read that like in college. This was years and years ago. It was awesome.
Awesome. Do you have the name of that book? If not, we can put it in the show notes.
Yeah, I would have to look it up. Yeah, I
All
don't
right.
remember what it's called.
I looked it up, and this gives me a perfect opportunity for my last question. I literally wrote it down, and it's exactly what you're talking about. You get one shot to suit up for an NFL team. I'm asking this because I know about your football background. You get one shot.
Okay.
What's the team and what's the jersey number?
Oh man, is it like a current team or can I like go back in time? So I'm
Yeah,
playing with certain
it can be
players.
like all Madden, right? So like you can go back to
Okay.
any era as well.
Yeah, yeah. I'd probably go back to like the mid, like Tom Brady's first Super Bowl, maybe middle Super Bowl, like 2010, 11, 12, somewhere in there where it's like one of those
Right when
like
the
young
dynasty was
teams.
building.
Yeah, yeah, like one of those young teams where he still had some unbelievable receivers and stuff.
Mm.
I wouldn't be good at a slot receiver, but I'd play slot receiver just to get one of his passes, like get a touchdown pass
Yeah.
and give me number 30 because that's what I was in college.
Why 30? Was that what you're given,
That
or
was
was that
no, yeah, that was just my number. So I'd have to put that on. He's like, "Hey, look, I made the NFL. Yeah, I'm the slowest guy in the NFL, but I did it."
Okay, cool. So if your family and friends are listening, for Brennan's next birthday, give him 30 New England Patriots, from that era, and then he'll be a happy, happy man.
Yeah, that's right.
Awesome. Listen, Brandon, thank you so much. I know life is crazy right now with you moving. First of all, I'm honored that I get to be the last podcast host to have you with this now famous background of you in the corner. And I'm just so happy that you're able to share all this information about yourself, about your master's coaching, a lot of stuff that I'm listening to very wholeheartedly because I'm in the middle of this whole thing of me being an older athlete. And I need to really listen to what I'm capable of and be okay with, about going hard less frequently because that's what my body needs from me. So I really
Yeah.
appreciate that.
For sure. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me on. And the other thing too is like I'm going through the same stuff, right? It's like I tell my athletes not to train hard, but I want to train hard, and I tell them to recover, and I don't want to recover. Like I just want to go and eat the ice cream and stay up late
Mhm.
too. So I'm saying it because I also understand how challenging it can be, but I know it's the right thing to do. So that's just an encouragement for everyone of like your coach is going through the same thing. So also empathize with your coach when he's telling you
Yeah.
what to do.
Awesome. And then if people want to find you, how can we find you online on your Instagram and on your website?
Yeah, yeah, you can just go to at Brannen Dorman on Instagram or at Redemption Athlete. Both of those are live and post, maybe not on my personal one, but the Redemption Athlete gets stuff all the time.
Okay, great. Brandon Norton, thank you again. And I'll talk to you later.
Awesome. Thank you.
Before we say goodbye, here's one crazy statistic for you. Did you know that almost 40% of people who listen to the show don't actually subscribe to it? Now, I didn't think that was a big deal until I actually learned about the power of hitting subscribe. For you, the listener, you get to stay up to date when we drop episodes on a weekly basis. But for us as a podcast, it really helps our visibility and helps us attract great brands and great listeners to help grow this podcast. So if you enjoyed this episode or you're a big fan of the show, please do us a massive favor and hit subscribe. Thank you so much.